Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. We're going to give people some time to log in.
Oh, we have someone from Ohio. Very cool. Oh, Bergen County Zoo. Very cool. Oh my gosh, Canada. Very nice. Wow, we've got people tuning in from all over. It's very exciting. Oh my gosh.
Wow, we're up to 200.
Awesome. Oh, Bergen County Audubon Society. Hello. Very exciting. We'll just give people another minute here to get logged in and then we'll get started.
Yeah, I see a number on the chat box going up, and with since I'm sharing my screen, I can't get into that. So if anybody's trying to say hello to me directly, I'll say hello right back.
All right, well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. So first of all, hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar today, Marvelous Monarchs and the Garden State. My name is Lily Mullock, and I work for the Nature Conservancy in New Jersey. We're very excited to have you spend your lunch hour with us today. As you can see, Mark and I both have our Monarch gear. We are very excited about today's presentation. Our presenter today is Mark Garland. Mark is a naturalist, and he is based in Cape May, New Jersey, who has joyfully been leading field trips and nature tours for more than 40 years. His fascination with monarch butterflies began more than 30 years ago when he was one of the first volunteers to begin tagging migrating monarch butterflies through citizen science project called Monarch Watch. In 1995, he founded a study of monarch butterflies at Cape Charles, Virginia, and this is a study that has continued for more than 30 years. After moving to Cape May, New Jersey in 2001, he immediately got involved with the New Jersey Audubon Monarch Monitoring Project, becoming their director in 2015. He says he's ready to retire, but his calendar says something quite different. And a more detailed biography about Mark can be found on his website, which we will put in the chat for you. Okay, do next slide. And real quick, I just wanted to run through some housekeeping for the webinar. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to put them in the Q&A component, and we will try our best to answer them during the session at the end of the presentation. Live captions are available during this session. If you click the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and then the little up arrow, you can hit show subtitle and Zoom will automatically generate live captions. And then if you need to turn them back off, hit that same live transcript button and then hit hide subtitles. This webinar will be recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel. We will also be sending a link in the follow-up email after the webinar. All right, next slide. So not only is Mark an incredible naturalist, but he is also a frequent visitor to two of our southern New Jersey preserves. For those of you who may be unfamiliar, the Nature Conservancy in New Jersey owns and manages several flagship preserves throughout the state. A link to our flagship preserves can be found in the chat as well. We have two beautiful preserves located in Cape May, New Jersey, an area that you will shortly learn plays a very important role in monarch migration. Each late summer into early fall, our Cape May preserves fill with monarch butterflies as they prepare for their big migration to Mexico. Our South Cape May Meadows Preserve, pictured here, is a 218-acre haven providing undisturbed habitat. Our critical lands manager has incorporated several features to this preserve in order to assist monarchs in their migration, as well as other beneficial pollinators. At the main entrance of the preserve, visitors and monarch butterflies can enjoy a rain garden, pictured in the bottom left photo. The rain garden has many beneficial plants for monarchs like common milkweed, goldenrod, butterfly milkweed, and aster. Next slide, please. Our other Cape May Preserve is called the Garrett Family Preserve at Cape Island Creek. One of the most exciting features about this preserve is the 4-acre wildflower field that runs right through the heart of the preserve. You can see an aerial view of this meadow in the bottom left photo. The wildflower field was designed with beneficial pollinators like monarch butterflies in mind. Thousands of wildflowers, milkweed, and goldenrod blooms pop up each year. The milkweed is essential for monarchs' life cycle as they cannot survive without it. The massive goldenrod blooms, which you can see in the top left photo, provide the monarchs with nectar late in the fall season, just before their big migration. Both of these preserves are really beautiful, and I definitely encourage you to visit them one day. I used to work on these preserves, and during many of my days out stewarding them, I would actually bump into Mark while he was out birding. So I think he can vouch for their beauty. And with that, Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you so we can dive into the species everyone has been waiting for.
Thank you, Lily. And we're going to try and cover a whole lot of things in about a half hour. My biggest problem, I often say, is I just want to go on forever about monarch butterflies. So a lot of elements of monarch biology, conservation, the work here in Cape May, I'm going to go over pretty quickly. There are a lot of resources out there to learn more about monarch butterflies, but I imagine that most of the folks who've tuned in on this already know a fair bit about the monarch butterfly. Really, it's probably one of the most beloved bits of wildlife on our continent or even in the world. I don't run into many people that don't like butterflies, and especially monarchs. And it's one of the most studied insects we have. I think the only insects that have been studied in greater depth are the ones that have direct economic impact on humans, either as agricultural insect pests or disease vectors. Happily, monarchs are beneficial and don't hurt us in any way, and fascinate us for reasons that we'll get into. It's a familiar orange and black large butterfly, and every once in a while I run into someone that mixes them up with others, but most everybody knows monarch butterfly, and we're all familiar with the 4-stage life cycle of all butterflies and moths. This is how a monarch butterfly begins its life. That's the egg of a monarch on the underside of a milkweed leaf. The caterpillars will only feed on members of the milkweed family, mostly the genus Asclepias, and they are a remarkable eating machine. In just 2 weeks, they put on over 3,000 times their initial weight. Crawling around eating, and it is usually just about 2 weeks before they then go into the metamorphosis, the chrysalis stage or the pupa stage, where the transformation occurs. And the entire process only takes about 35 days to go from the egg being laid to an adult emerged and flying around. And most monarch butterflies, like most insects, shortly after they emerge as an adult, they're interested in 2 things. One is feeding, and the other is finding a mate to mate and begin the next generation. And from the time we first start seeing monarchs that have come back from tropical areas in late March in the southern US and April in most of the rest of the US and extreme southern Canada, that's what they're doing. And they're feeding, they're spreading around, and they're looking for mates, and the females are laying eggs on milkweed plants. This is our X-rated slide. The mating of the monarch butterflies is tip of abdomen to tip of abdomen, and discreetly they use their wings to hide that. And there are typically 4 generations of monarchs a year. And this chart from a wonderful organization called Journey North sort of shows that about every month, in the warmest time of year, you can have another generation emerge. Again, 30 to 35 days from an egg being laid to an adult flying around. And this is typical of a number of insects. And in fact, while 4 is the typical number, sometimes there's an early or a late generation. There can be 5. But once the end of summer is approaching in August or September, clues in the environment that we have not fully deciphered cause the last generation of the year to behave differently from their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. And instead of immediately looking to mate, they begin to travel south in this incredible migration where throughout much of the United States, they are headed to Mexico in areas we'll talk about and see shortly. And their urge to court and mate is subdued. They're in what's known as reproductive diapause. They're not going to mate until after they've gone through a prolonged period of winter dormancy. And of course, the reason for this cycle is the northern winter. Most of our insects are able to survive winter, at least in some numbers, in one stage of their life or another. In most cases, it's an immature stage for butterflies and moths, the egg or early stage caterpillar, or in the case of our swallowtail butterflies, as the chrysalis or the pupa stage. But monarchs have no adaptation that allows them to survive prolonged sub-freezing temperatures. As such, you could say it's actually a tropical creature, because that's what defines tropical creatures, an inability to survive the prolonged cold and freezes of winter. And so this incredible migration has evolved over the years, where a butterfly that cannot survive in any of its life stages in the temperate zone where winter occurs comes to this area because it is where milkweed, the plant that they absolutely depend on, it's the only food for their caterpillar, where milkweed thrives. There are some non-migratory populations of monarchs that occur in tropical America, all the way down to the Andes of South America, but they're typically very small populations, and the majority of the monarchs undertake this incredible migration. Some, of course, do winter along the California coast, but some, even ones from the Western United States, are headed down to Mexico. And where they're going in Mexico wasn't known until 1975. You know, a lot of creatures, birds and other migrants, you head into the tropics and you find a few here, a few there, they've spread out. Well, for a long time, people would head down to Mexico or Central America, and they wouldn't find any monarchs anywhere in the northern winter. And it turns out that most of them go, or virtually all of them go, to one of a few very small groves of trees high in the mountains west of Mexico City, a mountain range known as the Transvolcanic Mountain Range. And Dr. Fred Urquhart, a Canadian biologist, mobilized a lot of people to help look for the monarchs. And finally, 2 people found the first of the overwintering areas, an area known as Cerro Pelon. And if you're my age, you may remember this famous National Geographic cover when it was determined that you couldn't find monarchs anywhere else because they were all going to just one of a few groves. It's an incredible migration. And we could talk a little bit about how packing together by the millions in a small area benefits them, enabling them to overwinter more successfully. But that's a story for another day. So we're looking at this migratory map, and you can see the yellow is where monarchs occur throughout the summer, the orange area in spring. Some will occur in that area throughout the year, but they really spread through most of the continent. Just a tiny corner of the Pacific Northwest doesn't have milkweed, and that is what determines where the monarchs go. And In the northern Great Plains, the center of the country, a monarch that may be up there in areas that were historically prairies with a lot of milkweed and then became small family farms that had a lot of weeds growing around the edges of the fields or even between the rows, which included a lot of milkweed. And the monarchs up there had a pretty direct path to get down to Mexico. But think about the northeastern United States and a monarch that by the end of the summer is triggered to migrate, is trying to get down to Mexico. Switching maps here, if it just goes due south, it's going to be over the ocean, and that's danger. So they're not going to do that if they can avoid it. They're going to choose to stay over land during their migration. So they're going to trend to the southwest. But as they're heading that direction, they run into the prevailing winds of autumn in the eastern United States. And that's the northwest winds of our cold front. And so rather than fight those winds, these migrating monarchs, most of them have a tendency to only head as far inland as they need to stay off of the ocean. And you'll see that leads a lot of them here to New Jersey. At the same time, there are butterflies from southern Canada in the eastern Great Lakes region and western New York that may ride those prevailing winds, and they will also end up in New Jersey. So if we put those two lines together, it's a bit like a funnel. And it shows that a large number of monarch butterflies from the northeastern part of the United States or southeastern Canada in their migration in many cases are going to end up in New Jersey. And that little tail at the tip of New Jersey, that's the Cape May Peninsula. And these butterflies that are going to choose to stay over land rather than water whenever possible, huge numbers of them typically will migrate right through the Cape May Peninsula, right down here to Cape May and Cape May Point, the very last bit of land before Delaware Bay, and continuing their migration. And here we are with some monarch butterflies on some seaside goldenrod in front of the Cape May Lighthouse. We sometimes get very large numbers here. It's a very popular attraction for nature lovers in the fall to come at times when there's a lot of monarch butterflies around. And we've been studying them, as I'll talk about in a moment, for 30 years now. And we get a lot of opportunity with all these monarchs around to see some interesting behaviors and biology. And I could spend another few hours talking about some of the interesting biology of monarchs, but we're only going to go into one such story today, and that's why are monarchs orange? And orange and black in particular, or red and black in many parts of nature and insects, is what's known as aposematic coloration or warning coloration. They are advertising to potential predators that they are dangerous. And it's not that they sting or they bite, but from the milkweed plant that the caterpillars feed on, they're able to incorporate chemicals that are toxic and distasteful, or actually emetic, to vertebrate animals. Any bird or lizard or mammal that eats a monarch butterfly is going to encounter these toxins. And the great Dr. Lincoln Brower, the late Lincoln Brower, shown here in Mexico, did the great experiment many years ago that made the cover of Scientific American with feeding a blue jay that was raised in the lab, known in the paper as the naive blue jay, feeding it monarch butterflies. And the reaction, I'll kind of apologize for this next photo, but it did make the cover of Scientific American. This is what happened with the blue jays when they ate monarch butterflies. They got violently ill. And in subsequent days, that blue jay just headed to the far side of the cage if it was offered a monarch butterfly, did not want anything to do with it. This is how they react. And it seems that many potential predators don't even have to take that first taste. They recognize the warning coloration and stay away from it. One of the fascinating things we see here in Cape May every fall, where we have a wonderful hawk migration, is this little falcon known as a merlin. It's a feisty thing. It goes after anything. And they'll occasionally see a monarch flying around. They'll go and they'll grab it. They'll take a look and they will let it go. And we will watch a monarch fly away after having been in the talons of a little falcon. Because usually when they grab it, they just grab it by the wing. And we will, in our catching and tagging of monarch butterflies, a few times each fall, find a little perforation in the wing that shows us it has been in the talons of one of these little falcons. Last fall, we saw something here that we had not seen before, though. And that's, forgot we had this one. The toxins in the monarchs do not affect invertebrates. So they can be fed upon by mantids and dragonflies and assassin bugs. So they do have some predators. Anyway, we were watching last fall at a time when a lot of monarchs were around, a yellow-billed cuckoo that was grabbing monarch butterflies. And in most cases, it was rejecting them. It would grab it, and for some reason, would let it go. But some of the monarchs it grabbed, it actually gobbled down. And we think somehow this cuckoo was able to recognize that some monarchs have greater concentrations of the toxins than others. And since they are distasteful or emetic, it was probably a taste test. It's like, can't eat that one, but I can eat this one. So we watched this go on for about an hour. It was a fascinating little study that they are not completely immune to vertebrate predation. Anyway, let's talk about the work we're doing here in Cape May. The Monarch Monitoring Project was founded in 1990, and in 1992, we began our data collection. Dick Walton on the left got the idea to do this project, and he contacted Dr. Brower, the world's authority on monarchs for decades, to develop the protocol for our project. And right away, they contacted Cape May naturalist Louise Zamitis to help out. And Louise has been active really almost since the very beginning of the project. And there are three parts to our project. One is a driving census. It's hard to count, it's impossible to count every monarch. So the orange line that's appearing here is a route that's driven 3 times a day for a month and a half, September to mid-October, then twice a day in the second half of October when the day length is getting shorter. And one member of our team drives this at a slow rate of speed, counting every monarch they see along the way. It's the sampling technique. Doesn't tell us how many monarchs are here, but it gives us a basis to compare one year to another. And we've completed 30 years of conducting this census for 2 months every fall. Second important part of our project is public education. We do a lot of programs, formal and informal, around Cape May Point in the fall. Teaching about monarch biology and the work of our project. And then the third is the tagging. The tags we use are issued by Monarch Watch, a project based at the University of Kansas. And each of these tags has a unique, now it's 4 letters and 3 number code that's never repeated. And there's no transmitter on these things. The biologists or the technicians haven't come up with those yet, although there's some preliminary work being done with transmitters. But these depend on somebody finding the tag somewhere else on the migration. So as you might imagine, the vast majority are never seen again. But I'll show you results in a little bit. We also keep a number of other data points since we catch these creatures, and no, putting the tag on doesn't change the way they fly, doesn't hurt them. If you're one of those folks that was taught you can't touch the wings of a butterfly, that's an old spouse's tale. It's folklore. You can indeed touch the wings, and we do. But we've got them in hand, usually for only about a minute, to get our data points and let them go. And here are some of the places where monarchs we've tagged in Cape May have been subsequently found. You can see that migratory route is really keeping them east of the Appalachian Mountains along the Gulf Coast. And a few have gotten blown off course. There's a couple out in the Bahamas, and a couple on days of south wind have been found to our north. But really, there's a very, very clear trend here. And we're excited. We're getting close to 100 of the monarchs we've tagged over the years being found in Mexico. And when I show you the pictures from Mexico, you'll see certainly not every monarch that makes it to Mexico is going to be seen by someone. The vast majority never will. So we're sure that that number represents many, many more that have successfully made the trek to Mexico. And the 8 spots I've just popped up there are ones that this last fall from our tagging efforts where they've been found. There are a bunch that are found near us in Cape May. I don't put those on the map. but you can see last year's tagging recoveries are going along with the trend. We've pretty much figured out which way they're going. And this is to our knowledge, the world land speed record for a monarch butterfly, one that was found 558 miles from Cape May Point, 3 days after it was tagged here, Cape May. That's a remarkable rate of speed for a little butterfly that weighs half a gram. But right along that migratory route, it somehow knows the right way to go. Here's a whole bunch of numbers. This is how many we've tagged each year. The upshot is we have now tagged over 100,000 monarch butterflies over the course of our project. And we get a lot of this work done because we are able to hire initially 1 and now 2 young naturalists to work with our project each fall. They do most of the driving censuses. They do most of the tagging along with our volunteers. And they do a lot of our public education. And we're excited that many of these young naturalists have gone on to professional careers in biology or environmental education. We feel that working with young naturalists is an important part of our educational outreach. We haven't hired for 2022 yet. So if there's young naturalists in the audience or people that know enthusiastic young monarch fanatics, we'd love to put them to work. We will be hiring 2 again in 2022 through New Jersey Audubon Society. Like I say, the naturalists are involved with public education, and at many of our programs, we finish up by actually tagging some of the monarch butterflies, and we recruit people from the audience to become the launching pad and let the monarchs go as they head back into the wild to continue their migration. And this is one of those things that you can't have this little butterfly sitting on your finger for a few minutes before it takes off without really feeling some connection or kinship to it, as is sort of a key component of environmental education. These close encounters with wildlife can really change lives. And so we're very excited to do these programs and see people of whatever age as they are excited to have this little butterfly crawling on them, taking off, heading on their way. And it's just one of the most fun things I do every year. And off it goes. So how are the monarch butterflies doing? One of the best ways to tell is by looking at the numbers in Mexico. The arrow there points towards Mexico City. We're about 200 kilometers plus or minus west of Mexico City in these high mountains, and each of those butterfly icons represents one of the spots where monarchs overwinter. And starting in the winter of 94-95, biologists in Mexico have tried to assess how many monarchs are there by measuring with surveying equipment the precise land area that is covered with monarchs in the trees. And that gives us some sense, not of how many monarchs are there, it's tens of millions or even hundreds of millions, impossible to count, but it shows us how it varies from one year to another. And it's been pretty widely publicized that the studies in Mexico have been showing a real downward trend since this began almost 30 years ago. And we'll talk a little bit about the reasons. Again, this is something we could go on about for hours. Well, here's a whole bunch more numbers. This is 30 years of census data here in Cape May, broken down by the week. And we have the longest continuous quantitative data set on monarch numbers. Our numbers go back a little longer than the Mexico numbers. We do all the statistical analysis. And what have we learned? One of our naturalists from 2021 took the lead on preparing this paper for the scientific journal Global Change Biology and documenting that in the 30 years of our study, the monarch migration is shifting later. A lot of us presume that because of climate change, but now we have it documented. But the other thing we've learned is when we look at our census data for 30 years, while there are wild fluctuations, and that's typical for insect populations, when you draw the trend line, it's almost level. It's almost level. So what's happening with monarchs in Cape May is different from what's happening to monarchs in Mexico. So what does this mean? Why are monarch populations doing better here? There's a couple things. Number one, the farm belt monarchs don't migrate here. Out in the Midwest, the farm belt that was prairies 200 years ago and was little family farms 50 years ago is now these massive monocultural farms without any significant habitat left. No, monarchs just need milkweed and flowers, and there's not much of that in a massive cornfield. And if we go back to that slide where we looked at the monarchs from the upper Midwest having the easy journey to Mexico, if they are not going to be able to reproduce up there, this is a major loss of monarchs. And when we go back to this slide where the monarchs are coming from that arrive in New Jersey and in Cape May, they're not coming from the Farm Belt, which is there. Another reason, butterfly gardens are widespread. Like I say, it only takes a couple of milkweed plants and some wildflowers, some nectar producing plants to support butterflies. And especially in the Northeast, butterfly gardening has become very, very popular. There's also danger of migration further south from here. Texas, with climate change, has been facing more and more frequent droughts. And in droughts, you don't have flowers in the fall, and especially in the late fall with the migration shifting later. The monarchs that are funneling through Texas, and if we look at that, most of them are going to end up going through Texas. If that area doesn't have flowers to support the migration, we may be losing a lot of them on their way south. There are also some issues in Mexico. Not going to talk about that, but that could be another reason. Just real quickly, butterfly gardening, again, milkweed for the caterpillars, flowers that have nectar for the adults. And native flowers are best. This is something called a giant sunflower that grows abundantly in Cape May. But garden flowers that have nectar, like these marigolds, will also provide nectar for the migrating monarchs. And you have the flowers, you're going to see some other butterflies too, like this common buckeye. And just a tip of the cap to the Nature Conservancy here in New Jersey. This is one of the paths in that wildflower meadow at the Garrett Family Preserve. And this just shows you a whole big patch of common milkweed out there. This is a spectacular, oversized butterfly garden, but you don't need dozens of acres to support monarchs. Even a single potted plant on an apartment balcony with a milkweed and maybe another pot with some flowers that produce nectar can be enough to help monarch butterflies, because indeed butterfly gardens are compensating for the lost habitat. Finally, we'll take you to Mexico. This is the town of Angangueo, up nearly 9,000 feet in the mountains, and it's in the hills surrounding there where two of the major overwintering areas for monarchs occur. There's a mural in town, and the identity of this town is deeply tied to the monarch butterflies that come each year. And if you're able to visit the preserves in cool, cloudy weather and earlier in the winter, you're going to see trees just covered with monarch butterflies. And then about this time of year, late February, as they're preparing to head north, by mid-March, they'll all be on their way back north. You'll see them starting to stretch their wings and even to take off. This is at the El Rosario Preserve. And at times, the number of monarchs that you'll see in the trees and in the air is absolutely stupendous. It's well worth the visit, and visiting the Mexico preserves, spending money for lodging and guides and restaurants makes the monarch ecotourism really beneficial to the people that live in those areas, makes the living forest and the living monarch butterflies an important economic resource to people that don't have a lot of economic resources. So go to Mexico if you get a chance. So if you want to help monarch butterflies, what can you do? You can plant a butterfly garden. Again, if you have absolutely no place, not even an apartment balcony, you can do something my wife did, and that's volunteer at a local nursing home where she planted a butterfly garden so that the residents could look out the window, see the flowers and see the butterflies. You can encourage legislators. There's a lot of things that come up before our governing bodies at local, state, and federal level that are going to protect habitat, protect pollinators specifically. And we all need to be involved with the political process to help support conservation and protect wildlife such as monarch butterflies. You can support conservation groups. The Nature Conservancy has been very active in Mexico, in the areas around the preserves, providing resources for the people down there. The World Wildlife Fund is another that's been very active in Mexico. But in your community, there is probably some conservation group that's working on protecting pollinators, protecting habitat, protecting monarchs. Those of you here in New Jersey Audubon is very active with our project. That's where our budget is found. And the Nature Conservancy, of course, for their great work here in Cape May and throughout the state. And then finally, as we mentioned, well, not finally, I've got one other point. Visit the Mexican monarch reserves. And also, if you can buy organic, because in the Farm Belt, those massive, massive monocultural fields can only be sustained with the use of a lot of agricultural chemicals. So that's a quick version. Like I say, I want to go on for about another 6 hours talking about monarch butterflies, but some of you are on your rush hour or your lunch hour, excuse me. And so if you want to stay in touch with the work we're doing here in Cape May, we have a page on the New Jersey Audubon website. We run an active blog in the fall, and we also have social media presence on Facebook and Instagram. We're not on Twitter, but we're in those places as well. So that's what I've got for you. Lily, I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you, Mark. That was so incredible. Definitely learned a lot. I believe now we are going to open up the webinar for some questions. So I hope you're ready, Mark.
Okay, I'll just read them to you, Mark. We have a bunch. Actually, the first question, a few people posted this. They're wondering how can they apply for seasonal positions? Is there a direct link online, or where can they get more information?
It is through New Jersey Audubon, so njaudubon.org. The positions are not posted yet. They're usually not posted until the spring, but on the NJ Audubon website, there is a tab for all the open positions with the organization. So keep your eye on that. Usually it's around May that the positions are announced.
Okay, what's the best way to find roosting monarchs in Cape May Point? Early dusk or dusk or early evening?
Yeah, when there are a lot of monarchs coming through, and September and October is when the vast majority come through, but in that time period, the weather and other events we don't completely understand cause some days to have very few and some days to have a lot. A couple of those photos I showed that have a lot of monarchs clustering together, we call that a roost. And that will occur when there's a lot of monarchs around and when it's getting chilly in the evening. They will cluster together just like, you and I might get close together when we're cold to share some body warmth. They seem to do that as well. They're usually fairly close to the dune in Cape May Point, but there's no magic bullet to find the roost. Those of us that are enthused down here, we sense that there's a lot of monarchs around and it's getting chilly, and we go start visiting a bunch of different spots. We go kind of crazy running around, and we try to spread the word through our social media if we find any roosting areas, but it's different places every night. It doesn't even happen every year. And it's a spectacular thing to see, and I wish I had a better answer, but you just got to go and look.
What steps would you recommend for starting a pollinator garden?
There are a number of online resources that talk about the good plants within your area, but the principle is pretty simple. nectar producing flowers, and especially native flowers to your region, are going to be useful to all sorts of pollinators. And if you are specifically wanting to help certain species like monarchs, then you're going to need the food plants that the immature stages need, like milkweed for monarch butterflies. And there's a lot of resources, if you're especially interested in butterflies, with what the host plants are for the different species. I like to say it's the kids who are the picky eaters. In most cases, the caterpillars will only feed on one or a few different kinds of plants, but the adults will go to any nectar source that they can actually reach with their mouth. So like deep tubular flowers are only going to be available to creatures like monarchs that have a long proboscis, or to hummingbirds, whereas something like Queen Anne's lace with very, very small flowers can appeal to a lot of smaller insects. So to have a real variety of pollinators, you'll want a variety of nectar sources.
What's their lifespan?
This is the fascinating thing. The generations of monarchs that are occurring in the temperate zone, that are engaging in courtship and mating and territoriality right after they've become adults, all of those activities cause a lot of wear. Adult butterflies do not have any ability to repair body parts. There's no growth or development. So basically they wear out. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong early in the adult lifespan of a butterfly. But if they avoid predators, if they avoid collisions with vehicles, if they avoid even a heavy thunderstorm, if they don't get out of it, a hard falling raindrop can create a fatal blow to a butterfly. If they avoid all of that, maybe 6 or 8 weeks for a monarch butterfly, which makes this migratory phenomenon of the monarchs going to Mexico all the more amazing, that they can live maybe 8 months. They do that partly by having that mating urge subdued. So early in their life, they're not engaged in territoriality, courtship, mating. And once they get to Mexico, for the 4 or 5 months they're down there, they're spending the vast majority of their time in dormancy. And just they're sitting on the trees, not moving at all, leaving their roosts maybe only once every couple of weeks to drink a little water and then go back. They aren't aging by doing that. So I like analogies. If humans were like monarchs, we'd have a generation that would spend 15, 20 years developing to become an adult. That's the equivalent of the month in the immature stages for a monarch. And then we'd probably start our families shortly thereafter, and maybe we'd live to be 80 or 100 years. But imagine if once every 4 or 5 generations, there was a group of humans that after that 15 or 20 years of becoming an adult went on a trek, and they spent 40 years or half of a lifespan getting somewhere, and then they fell asleep for 300 years and only then started to come back to where they'd begun, start their family there, and only then their offspring would probably make it all the way back to where they began. So it's an amazing physiological elasticity that causes the lifespan to be so different for those southbound monarchs. I tell you, the problem with me is you ask me a question, I go on forever. Sorry about that.
Let's see. So would a dog be sickened if he bites a monarch?
Potentially, yes. Although probably a dog would have to eat several monarchs to get the effects of those toxins. And before the toxins could probably really affect the dog, the emetic quality would probably take over, and it would reject those monarchs, by vomiting.
Is there a way to tell which butterflies are more poisonous than others?
Not to me. There's probably some chemical analysis that could be done, and based on my observations last fall, which again, it really astounded me to watch that cuckoo. Maybe we just all need a sentry cuckoo. It's shown that some species of milkweed typically have higher concentrations of the toxins than others, but it's also been shown that within a species, some individual plants have more or less. We believe the toxicity of the monarch as an adult is directly related to what it fed on as a young butterfly, or as a caterpillar, which is a young butterfly. If you check the sources, and I don't have this committed to memory, but which of the milkweeds are less toxic, and you knew a monarch had fed on those in its caterpillar stage, then you would know. But just a monarch that you encounter, to my knowledge, without doing like chemical analysis, there's no way to know.
We've had several questions about the OE parasite. Have you done any research, or do you have observations on the OE parasite?
We do. We don't do it routinely as part of our work. It is a greater issue in the South, where the parasite, it's a protozoan, I believe, can be, its populations are sustained throughout the winter. The whole field of diseases to monarchs, OE, and other things that Dr. Sonia Altizer at University of Georgia has been a leader on, is a subject for a whole nother webinar. But yeah, we periodically are doing tests for OE. We don't do the tests for every single monarch that we catch and tag. And from the work we've done, it has not been a major problem with the monarchs we're seeing in Cape May.
I have a couple questions about the driving route used by the Monarch Monitoring Project. How is it determined? And then are you willing to share the driving route for others to drive and see monarchs?
Well, I mean, the driving route is not necessarily the best place to see monarchs. If people want to come to Cape May and see monarchs, the best is the very end of land, Cape May Point, often right along the dunes and all of that. The census route was determined by Lincoln Brower and Dick Walton in the early 1990s. You notice there's a 2-year gap between the project founded in 90 and data collection in 92. They tested a lot of different ways to try and sample the population. And the driving route that was determined has been chosen because it heads through a number of different habitat types. You know, over the years, we've looked and say, is it really the best route? But what's important is that we are consistent, that we are using the same route year after year, and that allows our data to be comparable from one year to the next. But if people want to see monarchs, there's no reason to drive the monarch census route.
Is raising monarchs, a few questions actually about raising monarchs indoors for outdoor release. Is that a good idea?
There are folks that think that raising large numbers of monarchs inside is going to help the population. I think most biologists would say that's not true. There's an environmental, an ecological concept called the carrying capacity of the environment. The environment is only going to support so many of any creature. There's going to be fluctuations within it. You know, one analogy I heard is the carrying capacity. You can think of it as like a bucket. There's a 5-gallon bucket. And if you have 10 gallons of water and try and pour it in a 5-gallon bucket, you're only going to have 5 gallons. So to try and do mass rearing of monarchs, to put them in the environment, they're not all going to make it down in the migration. Raising a few monarchs inside for education and inspiration is something we do and something I recommend. To watch the transformation from caterpillar to chrysalis, from chrysalis to adult, is a spectacular thing to see. It's a wonderful educational opportunity, but you can do that raising a few inside. That I recommend. Trying to raise hundreds to augment the population, you can feel good about it, but it's not going to make a dent in the overall population of monarchs, I'm afraid.
Where's the best place to see more of your photos?
Well, that's very kind. I do have a website that I think has been shared, just mgnature.com. I put stuff up there, and I have I put stuff about monarchs up on the Facebook and Instagram pages of the Monarch Monitoring Project. So thank you. That makes me feel good.
And then a couple people have asked about you doing presentations for them. What's the best way to reach you? Would it be through your website?
Yeah, every page on my website has a, email me
Okay.
little thing, and my yeah, I'll just throw out my email, just my website, mgnature.com. You do mgnature@me.com, and I get the email. As you've noticed, I don't mind talking about monarch butterflies.
We have time for one last question. How do monarchs know when to migrate?
Oh, we're trying to figure that out, the scientific community. There's a lot of theories. It's not temperature, because any monarch that emerges in our area after about mid-August as an adult, and I say any, there are a few that aren't programmed right, and we always see a few mating in the fall, but it has to do with the time of year, not the temperature. And there's some indication. Dr. Chip Taylor at the University of Kansas, the founder of the Monarch Watch Project, a great monarch biologist, has this theory. It has to do with the angle of the sun, which at a certain angle, monarchs emerging after that time are going to be triggered to migrate, and that angle is reached earlier in places further north. So there's some indication that there's a chemical change as the season goes on in the milkweed plants that they're feeding on, that they cue in on. There's probably a multiplicity of factors, and to my knowledge, nobody has figured it out for sure, but there are theories and tests going on.
All right, well, thank you, Mark. That was a fantastic presentation. And thank you to everyone for spending your lunch hour with us. Just a quick reminder, we have recorded this webinar and we will be uploading it to our YouTube channel. We will also be sending it out in a link with the follow-up email that you should expect to see in a couple of days. I just want to give a huge thank you to Mark and the Monarch Monitoring Project for putting this presentation together for us today. We all really learned so much. We really enjoyed your photos, and it was just so great to sit down and learn about monarchs from you. So thank you so much, and we hope everyone has a wonderful day.